Welcome to the first episode of the Expected Buffalo Outlet. This is a new podcast series we are going to be doing now because, frankly, a lot of people, including myself at times, are a little bit tired of the nuance of the day today of the Buffalo Sabres. And sometimes you just want to enjoy the rest of the league and talk about the things with hockey. So that is the purpose or the outlet that we are going to give you here. We're going to talk about hockey, gambling or betting, if you will, fantasy hockey. Next week we're going to get into NHL draft stuff, and then there's some ideas of business of hockey, team stuff, CHL, around the world. So all the nuance and stuff like that of hockey, while still mixing in some Sabres angles here and there, because at the end of the day, that is what we are. We are a Sabres podcast at heart. So for this first one here, like I said, we are going to talk about some hockey. I guess you could say gambling, and then fantasy hockey too, and then a little bit of Sabres at the end, maybe. I am joined by my good friend Jay from PuckLuck.com. Jay, man, I really appreciate you joining me for this first one.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so like I told you before we started, I will openly admit that I am not a person who gambles a lot. I never really got into it, but I dabble here and there. So I'll give you my story. The last time that I actually placed a bet on a hockey game was last year in the playoffs. It was the day before we were going to go to Disney. So I was watching hockey. I was excited about the trip, getting the plane the next morning, which I had to be on at 5 a.m. and it was like 11 o'clock. So it was not going well. So I just threw together a bet for the Bruins game. I think I threw like $10 at it. And I went with some crazy parlay because when I do bet, it's some like wild parlay because I'm like, oh, maybe I'll get lucky, make a lot of money. That's the way I go when I do it. So I think I bet 3 players to score. It was Pasternak, maybe Coyle, or maybe somebody else in the lineup. I can't think of who it was. But the guy that I went crazy all out on was Lindholm. Because I just didn't. I think he had like 1 goal going in like to this like all season long. So I don't know. I threw like, yes. So it was like something crazy. It was a ridiculous number. Anyways, all 3 hit. Woke up in the morning and made like $250. I was like sick, going to Disney with money in my account. And then I get in the plane and we get there. We meet our friends there, and I'm like, dude, I'm on a heater. Like I hit this big bet. We're in Florida. I'm like, I am gonna put some more bets on. I'm on a heater. My friend's like, dude, you're in Florida, you can't. Oh. So that the nuances of betting, and that was literally the last time I placed a bet in anything. I do have a Super Bowl Bills bet out there. So if that hits, I'm gonna make like $250. So these stats out there for me still.
Nice.
But go ahead.
It sounds like at least you kept your money, so that's good.
Yeah, I honestly don't even know what I spent it on. Probably in Disney. I put it in my account right away, and or I blew through it trying when I got back, thinking I was on a heater, and tried to like bet on a whole bunch of stuff and lost it all. That's usually what ends up happening.
Yeah.
So let's get into your site and my silly stories and get into kind of the whole thing. So one of the things that I'm interested in, because I have my own, here's how it started story for Expected Buffalo. So I don't think I've ever really asked you. So PuckLuck, where did it come from? The idea, how, why? Was there a gap? Was something you always been interested in? I'm always curious for people like how and why.
Well, I guess we should probably start where you and I were introduced, and that was through Die by the Blade when we were both running for SB Nation. You brought me aboard, and that was probably, 2018, I want to say, somewhere around there. PuckLuck, the concept of it started even before that. It predates that. Basically around when Daily Fantasy Sports first started, I was trying to dabble in it, I guess I'll say. And this had to be, I don't know, 2015, probably about 10 years ago. And if you remember, FanDuel and DraftKings started out as Daily Fantasy Sport only apps, and they kind of exploded onto the scene. So I was like, okay, well, let me look into this. And I started playing through a few lineups out there and realized quickly that I was losing my money. And I'm like, there's got to be some strategy to this. Well, shortly after I saw that there was a study done, and I actually pulled up the numbers today. It showed that 91% of the profits were shared by 1.3% of daily fantasy players. So basically, only 1.3% were taking home these spots, meaning there had to be more to it than just dumb luck, right? There's skill. It's not intuition. There's skill. There's a process, and it's clearly some sort of data that they're using that helps them. So I'm like, well, I can do that. I'm good with statistics. I know everything there is to know about hockey. Like, let me see if I can exploit the NHL market. So it started with just a small little Excel file where I was trying to just gain an advantage in the daily fantasy space by trying to project what a player can produce that day. So yeah, it's really just my curiosity as to whether I can do something in the space that got me started.
Interesting. And I like the way you think about it, because that's really, I mean, we think about the numbers aspect of it, and we're both kind of in that way, like with the expected goals, the advanced stats, and we're both into that kind of thing. And I shouldn't say we, and I guess you too, when you write your articles, kind of put that into covering the team and what we're seeing, what we're watching on the ice. I never really thought about until you started doing it, is taking that information, taking that data, and using that to build out your model, build out your system, and put all that information in. Um, so I guess without you, of course, giving away the secrets, you're not going to do that. And you kind of went into it a little bit, but like, is there? I guess the answer is probably just like model building, but like the science behind it. Like, are you taking advanced stats? Are you taking? I mean, because I was thinking about it today. I'm like, there's so much that can go into it. A team on a back-to-back, a player that is hot, a backup goaltender. Like, there's so much. I feel like information that you can load into it. Um, I don't know, like your model, your system. I can only imagine all the inputs that you have, because everything you have to take into account, especially over an 82 game season. How things can very different on back to backs or 3 and 4s and road trips and goaltenders and all of that.
Yeah, yeah, it really is, and honestly, it started out. I had this, daily fantasy model that I was starting to build out. And over time, obviously, it changes, it develops. I test it, it gets better, it gets stronger. But I also had a separate team-based model, which started out very simple. I just realized I could get close to picking 60% of the games correctly by just using Corsi data, which was something that obviously was huge in the start of the analytics movement. Just base it off shot attempts and how teams can suppress shot attempts as well. So it was really all based on that. And as time developed, I realized quickly the two have to mesh, because you can't really project a game based off of team data without knowing the players in the lineup. So I started paying more attention to that and how it affects, from a player perspective, how it affects the team, and the model kind of meshed and grew from there. To the point now where there's basically a goals for and a goals against value assigned to each player in the model. And that's, based on it. It's a rate stat basically that I made up, not made up, but obviously tested and
Yeah, right.
came up with. And then from there, I basically just plug in the lineups every single day, and I know based on this player, based on his role and what he's expected to play that day, time on ice, at even strength, on the power play, penalty kill, I can get a goals for and a goals against value for that player, and combine it all up and compare it to who he's facing, and how if you're going against, let's just use like Sabres and Hurricanes, since that's the game tomorrow, or today if you're hearing this on Wednesday. Yeah, but if you're facing the Jordan Stahl line, that they're going to suppress shots against you. So just all that's weighed into this model, and it's very in depth, but it's very simple as far as updating each day, because I got it down to a science where you just have to plug in lineups each day, and then you can come up with win probabilities for each team.
So you mentioned 60%. I'm curious. This is a plain curiosity question. Is there like an industry standard? Like, just say like money lines, team aspect is 60%, 50%, 65. Like, is there like a industry standard that everybody kind of aims for?
Yeah. So basically through all the public models, I think Evolving Hockey did a lot of accumulating on getting everyone's data together and like, okay, so how are your projections going? How are your predictions going? And we figured out that it's about 63% is where you can top out on the money line picking NHL games. Obviously, that weighs in different disparities between the teams. If the Florida Panthers are facing the San Jose Sharks, obviously it's easier to pick the Panthers right now in that
Yeah.
matchup compared to the Panthers versus the Hurricanes. But it's ultimately it can get around 63%, and that's it. I think that's low compared to other sports, but that's basically where hockey's at.
Yeah, I mean, guess that falls right into my next question is, I have friends who ask me, because obviously I follow hockey, like, who's look at these games, who should I bet? Like, who do you pick? And I always tell them is like, my opinion, again, I'm not a gambler, but is never pick like games if you can avoid it, because in hockey it's common. The worst team in the league can beat the best teams in the league every single night. So I feel like that makes it more difficult. And when I go into and I do bets that I do end up placing, I go more on the, like I said, the parlays, the player props, the game props. Um, that's where I'm at. So I guess you kind of touched on it a little bit. Maybe if you want to like go into a little bit more on it, like the difficulty against first, hockey, that money line projection, like you said, the 63%, where maybe if it's like football, obviously maybe it's higher at 70, maybe 80%, because in most it's a smaller schedule, one, and two, the better teams are winning the majority of those games.
Yeah, that's true. I dug around a little bit recently on it. I think I saw something that said heading into the playoffs, the model CBS was using was at 67%. NBA falls anywhere between 65 and 70%. So NHL is definitely lower, and it's more of, obviously there's a lot more, like one goal can change everything in the NHL, and football is dictated more about game script and how each drive really dictates everything. But then the NBA, it's just over time, the best players are going to win out, and they're on the court a lot more than the best players in the NHL are on the ice. So it's easier to predict those sports, and I think because of that, there's probably a bigger edge to bet on NHL games. The sportsbooks have a tougher time predicting it. So if you think, which I do with PuckLuck, if you think you have a strong model, you might actually be better than the sport books at projecting games. Whereas they dedicate so many resources into the NFL and NBA because more people bet those sports.
Yeah.
They have it down to a science. It's just more easily projected by them.
All right. So on the player game prop angle, so it's fascinating to me. Just how you go about it. Like, is there trends? Is there hot teams, hot players? Is there? I remember, like, I don't know if it was last year or 2 years ago. Like, for a little bit until, like, the books figured it out. Like, Tage Thompson was a cheat code. Like, his shot attempts, like, you would just hit that every single day because it would always be so low. I think it was like when he was first breaking out, because, like, he didn't really expect it, and like,
Yep.
so, like, is that things you look for? Is it just like trends in a player? Is it like, I don't know? I guess I'm just fascinated from game to game or player to player, kind of how you put all of that together, or even kind of dig through all that, because it can be a lot.
Yeah, I'll get into trends in a second, but this also goes hand in hand with what I was just saying about the sportsbooks just being slow to adapt, basically, to the NHL. They're not as concerned about it because there is less money filtering in through bets on the NHL, that their player props sometimes don't. You'll see this where they kind of stay stagnant for a while, even though something's changed clearly. Whereas in the NFL, something's changed in a person's role or something, they're real quick to
Yep.
up on that. So when, like your example with Tage Thompson breaking out, what was it? What was it really? Why he was nailing his shot on goal overs? It was his opportunity, right? He was playing top line, top power play. All of a sudden, he's the focal point. The puck's filtering through him. That was the big difference. From previous years, he was more a complementary player. He was struggling. He was younger. Once he really got going, that's when he was just, I could definitely see why that was working. And and that goes with the trends. I mean, if you think about it, you go to the casino, you play roulette, black hit the last 3 times, it's still the same exact odds for red and black to hit on this next roll. So if you project it out, yeah, like you're looking at trends and you're like, oh, black's hot right now, I should bet black. And it's like, well, black and red still have the same chance of hitting. So is it really because black's hot, or did circumstances change? So is someone playing with new line mates? Who were they facing as far as opponents? Maybe they're facing easier opponents. That's why they're scoring more. Are they facing back with goaltenders? Are they receiving more power play time? And all that kind of context is why I built out PuckLuck to basically just kind of like give you a guideline. Like, okay, am I going crazy with this? Do I think like this is a good bet? If PuckLuck supports it, it's like, okay, that's my voice of reason to say like, okay, this is where PuckLuck projects it, and I've liked this today, so yeah, let's go with that. So as far as player props, that's really what I would focus on. Just using that to exploit, where the advantages are.
So here's a curiosity question for you, the person who's playing. So I was looking at your site today, and you had the game of the day up there. Is there instances where you're like, it kind of almost is like a watch the game question, but not really. Is there instance like where your model spits out something and you're like, no, that doesn't feel right, or like the gut on that isn't right, and you go against it, you go somewhere else, or do you just model says this, all right, I'm rolling with it?
Yeah, no, people ask me that all the time. Obviously, everyone has their own intuition and opinions on things, and I tell anyone who subscribes to PuckLuck, like, yeah, I mean, the model is what the model is. You can live or die by it for sure. It's always turned out a profit in the long run. But if you're feeling something, by all means, go for it. I mean, there's, like I just said, there's variables. There's a ton of variables that weigh into everything. And maybe the model is slow to pick up on certain things, or because it just needs the data to filter in, to really support it. So, yeah, me personally, there's times I've gone against, or generally what I would do is I'd stay away from the game if I really, just disagreed and the model spit it out as like a play of the day or something. But yeah, there's definitely times I've won against it as well.
Interesting. Okay, let's shift to fantasy here. I really have one question. How? I don't know how people do it. 82 games. It's almost daily. Like, I've tried to get into it numerous times. I've tried to do like dynasty leagues. I've tried to do just head to head or total points. It's just, I feel like by game like 32, I'm like, man, this is exhausting. It's every single day. I can't. And Godspeed to people who do it. And for you, like, if you keep up with it and follow it, it's too much for me. Like, I have a hard enough time with football. 82 games of hockey every single day essentially is a lot.
Yeah, and because it's every day, it becomes a burden at times. And I mean, you think about like fantasy sports, like it started with baseball, and like, how do you do that, for 100 and 160, yeah, it's like, that's even more wild to me. And sometimes there's like set year lineups, weekly leagues and stuff like that, where it's a little less of a burden. You're not having to go in every day and change your lineup. But yeah, I'm with you. It's tough. And I think that's why the fantasy space has really evolved to more towards like daily fantasy games where you're picking higher or lower on this, or you are plugging in a lineup, like I said originally, with, FanDuel and DraftKings and what they were doing originally. But Underdog Sports has come in and kind of changed the game. They have their best puck, or if you're familiar with through football, it's called best ball, where you just draft your team in the beginning of the year, and then it just takes your best lineup for that day or that week or whatever, and based on the scoring, so you don't have to set your lineups throughout the entire year, and then you just collect your winnings at the end if you had a good team. But the management is tough. It's a grind. You really have to be into it to want to keep up with it. And admittedly, I'm only in one fantasy hockey league. That's a season-long league. The rest of my time is spent, on daily fantasy and betting, because honestly, just to tie up money through something like that, it's like I could get the immediate, output that day just by playing daily fantasy, or, betting on a player prop or something that I see a bigger advantage.
Got it. Makes sense. Okay. So my goal here was 25 minutes. We're at 20.
Oh, wow.
So what that means, and right, it went pretty quick. What that means, unfortunately for you, though, is I have time for one Sabres question. So I know we said in this, we're going to try to avoid the Sabres as much as possible, or at least, put it to the side a little bit and maybe connect in some ways. It's one question, one single solitary question. It might be difficult because there's a lot of things. If you were the general manager, what is your first thing you're going to do, your top priority to fix this team?
Ooh, top priority?
Your top priority.
It's tough to say because, I mean, the thing I've been harping on since the offseason is, the Sabres need a top six forward, and they just never got that top six forward. And then it's like they're going to go in the season and try and get that top six forward because they have the cap space. And obviously that failed when, Kevin Adams was panicking, it seemed like immediately, and making calls to everyone when that Friedman report first came out. Yeah. Obviously there's like blocks of time, and there's I feel like solutions have windows, and I feel like you're past the window of that at this point. Right. I think there's not really at this point, there's not really a solution. You're not tearing down the team. You're not trading people necessarily looking to trade at the trade deadline for picks and prospects or anything like that, because, the Sabres have a lot of picks and prospects, too many, actually. They're not going to be able to sign them all. So, honestly, it might be considering a blockbuster trade in the offseason. You got something with the core just to switch up the core. Look for another team that's looking to do pretty much the same thing. It's whoever misses out in the East, because it's so tight. It feels like everyone just can't get over that hump, and it's the same teams in the playoffs every year, and that might happen again. And if that happens again, maybe Ottawa gets anxious, maybe Detroit gets anxious, and there's just something to do just to change up, mix things up. Honestly, that might be the thing, because the thing I've harped on with the Sabres all season, just I've wrestled with it in my mind. It's like it just seemed like they talked about the playoffs as a ceiling for this team. Like, oh, if we can get to the playoffs, the playoffs are the goal and all this stuff. And it's, since when are the playoffs the goal? They should be the floor, not the ceiling.
Yeah.
I mean, the Sabres went, if you remember back before the drought, they were one of the all-time best franchises in the NHL at making the playoffs. They were at 73% of their seasons they made the playoffs. And their longest drought before that was right before the lockout. They missed the playoffs for 3 seasons and then came back with their hair on fire out of the lockout.
Yeah, right.
I mean, never in their history before that had they missed the playoffs for 3 straight seasons. So it's unbelievable. Now, you add 13 years of missed playoffs and it's at 55%. And it's just like, what happened? So it has to do with the core pieces. You can't bank on everyone developing and taking a linear jump, because we saw it doesn't happen. Jack Quinn took a huge step back this season in production.
Everybody did. All your guys did, basically.
Yeah. And I mean, that was the talk with Cousins, right? He had that big season, took a step back, and was supposed to bounce back this year. And he looks, like it's not. It's even worse for him. We'll just say what it is. It's been worse. He's one of the worst WAR measured players on the Sabres per my model. So it's not good. And I know, I hate to be all doom and gloom, but we're bringing up the Sabres, and that's where it is. So I honestly, I think you gotta change things up, make some big splash, find a willing partner, and you don't necessarily have to win the trade, because we've seen that when you can just do something to change up that mix, there's talent on the team, and maybe it just starts to click.
Yeah, no, I'm completely agree with that. It's funny. You said, they have a lot of picks and prospects, and I was like, yeah, they have a lot of prospects. I was like, wait a minute, don't they have a ton of picks this year too? So I went and looked. They actually have 10 picks this year in the draft.
Yeah, unbelievable.
It's crazy. Insane.
What are you gonna do with those? And again, like, maybe that's part of a blockbuster package, but it has to be trade chips at this point. Like, there's no explanation, because if you look at all their prospects, they can't even sign those at this point. And then what are you going to do with, 3 extra picks? It doesn't.
Not to mention if you add more with the deadline because you're a seller, you're going to walk in there with 14 picks. Like, what are we doing here?
That's the thing. And then when the Jason Zucker conversation arises, which it's starting to, what do you do with him? It's like, well, I don't see him wanting to stay. Why would he? He's put forward a good season and he's playing some of his best hockey. Why shouldn't he go to a playoff contender? But what the playoff contender going to give up picks and prospects? And you don't really, unless you just repurpose everything, and turn around and trade it to someone else. It doesn't make a lot of sense to make those trades. You need players like Jason Zucker. You need to bring in guys like that, and age doesn't matter anymore because the core's so young and the team's so young. Age doesn't matter. It really is about just getting in players that can contribute. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a few people at last Sabres thing make a good point on this. Is the thing in the past with these veterans have been like, you trade them, do the right thing, and then it'll come around and it'll work out for you. Well, it's never come around. So like they've done this numerous times, and in free agency, it's never been an agent's like, oh well, you did my guy solid, so I'll get your it's never come around.
Right.
So I think at this point, like you stop doing the favors now, and if a guy has to sit there all year, you don't get what you want, then he sits there all year. You're not getting any benefit from it anymore. No, or actually never did in the first place.
Yeah, definitely not.
Okay. 26 minutes now. So at the end here, Jay, again, I appreciate you coming on. Really insightful. I learned some things. So the floor is yours. Promote your website. Go to town.
All right. Well, it's PuckLuck.com. It's pretty easy name to remember. There's free aspects of the site every single day. So there's daily game prediction. Game predictions. You're going to see goal projections on that and win probabilities. There's line combinations. We have the starting goalies up there for each day. They get updated as they're confirmed. Playoff odds for each team in the NHL. And there's always a betting pick of the day that's free every single day. And then there's monthly subscriptions available to people. It's tiered based on what you're looking to get out of the site. So there's a $10, $20, and $30 a month tier based on really what you want. If you're looking for betting suggestions, if you're looking for player prop data, if you're looking for betting tools, I just released a new shots on goal module that's pretty cool. It shows the projections, it shows recent trends, it shows where a player's fallen, and shots on goal for each game. So it's pretty extensive. So anything like that, just look into subscribing to PuckLuck and supporting what I do. And then you can find me on X at PuckLuckJ, and you can find PuckLuck.com on all socials at PuckLuck.com, spelled out DOTCOM.
I will say the shot module is super cool for anybody. I've actually, when you've been talking, I spent the last few minutes kind of playing with it a little bit. It's pretty cool. It's good stuff. So highly recommend it. From one numbers person to another. Subscribe, support Jay. Smart guy. Really recommend it.
Appreciate it.
So thanks again, Jay. I appreciate you being the first one. So you have that in your hat. You can pop it on your resume. So when this podcast series goes big one day, and you can be like, I was the first guy on that one. But I'm kidding. But I really do appreciate you taking the time, man. Best of luck to you. Bummer to see you off the Sabres day-to-day grind, but I know you'll pop back up somewhere. So definitely best of luck to you in the future and on the site too.
Appreciate it. And yeah, that might not be over, but for now, all my focus is on PuckLuck.com and making that as good as it can be. So yeah, thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, man.